Okay, class, well, welcome to our third week of class, January 25th through the 30th. It is the 25th of January. It's the fateful week that you knew would come. Well, just kidding. Actually, it's just a regular week, I think, in class. Anyway, this week you're going to be reading Chapter 3, reviewing the literature, and review those slides that are there. And then here I've got some literature review examples, just so you can see some examples looking for some of the things to look for in a literature review. So as you should be continuing to read your 2 to 3 articles this week to prepare yourself for the preliminary literature review that's due soon. So take a closer look at the literature review section of some of the research articles you're reading and look at how they organize it. It's not really organized just by article for 1 says this, article 2 says that, article 3 says that. Instead, it's organized by findings, by general to specific is usually how it goes. And so you have to organize your literature review that way as well. You can't just create a literature review that says article 1 says this, article 2 says that, article 3 says this. Instead, you need to put them together in a coherent way that has to do with the subject. So anyway, take a look at those literature reviews. What I look for in a review is those things listed down below. Is it comprehensive? Is it organized so that the references that are least related to the problem are discussed first and the most related references are discussed last? The review is more than a series of abstracts or annotations. Instead, it talks about them more. It doesn't just list the review and what the article said. It sort of critiques them or analyzes them a little bit. It compares and contrasts the results of the various studies listed. The review includes mostly primary sources of information. So those primary sources, we will talk about that in a minute here. It includes references that are relevant to the problem, only references that are relevant, an original summary and interpretation of the literature, and cited completely and accurately. Those are the things that we look for in literature reviews, and that's hopefully going to help you to read through that and be looking at the articles that you read for those elements. And then there's some instruction from the library on finding sources. And these are from Lynn, our librarian, and she'll talk about how to use a citation manager and find a referenced resource. And then you'll take a quiz on Chapter 3 this week. Again, the quizzes from here on out are 20 questions, 60 minutes. I just decided to standardize them all, 20 questions, 60 minutes. That's all the time I want you spending on those. Also this week you'll need to submit your city certification, and that's the Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative training that you go through, and that's the link right there for submitting that. What you do is you just basically submit the document they give you with your scores to the source or to this Dropbox, and then that's the end of the week. For you this week. There's no discussion going on this week in this class, but I do encourage you to go back and provide advice to other classmates on their discussion boards from last week's discussion. Some students posted a little bit later in the week and didn't really get much discussion, I guess, on their research ideas. So make sure you do that. And also don't forget on the next discussions that come up, don't forget to post on the discussion by Wednesday. That's an important rule, is to make sure you have your initial post by Wednesday. That way you're much more likely to receive feedback from your classmates on your research ideas and other things that you type and talk about. So remember to post your initial post on Wednesday. And although this week there is no discussion. Okay, and then also, yeah, if you do have time, look back and provide advice to other classmates on the discussion boards so that they have some feedback on their research ideas as well. Okay, and then I want to encourage you to narrow your focus. And one way to do this is to really look, as you're reading your articles that you're supposed to be reading, 2 or 3 per week, make sure that you look at what they are already doing within your interest areas. You're supposed to narrow it in a certain very narrow area of your interest area and look and see what other researchers have done within that area. Not just what they are doing, but also how they are studying that thing. You know, what are their research methods for studying it? Are they putting students into 2 groups, making one group do something and another group do another thing, and then comparing those? What is their research method? So be looking at that. looking at what they actually did in the article to conduct the research. What are their methods? Now, speaking of methods, I want you to look at some of these articles that I have as examples here. So here's an article to start out with, entitled Rural Elementary School Teachers Technology Integration. Of course, this is within my area of interest, and I'll be citing this article. I need to figure out if this is a primary or a secondary source. Remember that your literature review must be mostly primary sources. And so what is a primary source? Well, a primary source is a report of research done that is a report that is by the actual researcher who just did the study, and now they're reporting on that research study. By contrast, a secondary source is more of a compilation or a comparison or a conceptual framework. It's a combination of a bunch of different primary sources to come up with maybe principles or ideas to help move the work forward. And those are useful and valuable, but they're not exactly what we're looking for this literature review that you'll be doing. So again, as you're reading, you want to take down the citation for whatever you read. You want to make sure that you have some annotated information. Take notes on each article that you read about what it says inside of it. But whatever articles you read, you want to make sure that more of them are primary sources. This one is a primary source. Rural Elementary School Teachers Technology Integration. And actually you can tell through the abstract that it is a primary source. It says, based on survey responses from more than 500 third grade teachers, this study addressed 3 research questions relating to technology integration and its impact in rural elementary schools. So you have to ask yourself, is this a research study report, and is the person who is writing about it the same person who conducted the study? And it looks like it is. They say that they did a survey, and there are 3 questions relating to it and its impact in elementary schools. One other way to tell is if you go through the article. Every article is going to have a literature review and talk about what the literature talks about in this area, maybe some different things that they talk about. But there's always going to be this section, a methods section, if it is a primary source. There will always be a methods section, and a methods section is basically an outline of what the researcher did to conduct this study. It's basically a timeline. What did you do to conduct this study? And in this case it says this research involved a survey of random sample of third grade teachers in Ohio, to which more than 500 teachers responded. So it's very clearly that this was a research study implemented by the author, and they're reporting on it now. And so that's a way to tell that this is actually the primary source for this research study that was conducted. Another way to tell too is that you have findings. So methods tells you how they gathered the data. Findings tells you what they found from the data. And in this case, it lists the findings that they had, tells what they found as far as relationships go. So those are kind of the 2 sections that you look for a research study that is a primary source, and that's what you want to have most of as you are reading your articles for your literature review in your area of interest. I'll just show you an example of one that is not a primary source, and this is one that I actually wrote and was published. How to teach students to learn, techniques used to increase student capacity to self-direct learning. So I did an article on self-directed learning, and in order to gather the information for this article, I didn't do a research study. I didn't go out and find a population of people and gather information from them and collect data. Instead, I just basically did some research myself. I found, but not research study, but I did research of information. So I found a bunch of information on this topic, principles for fostering learning self-direction, and then I cite a bunch of these resources in here. But as we look through this article, we'll find principles that are very useful and very meaningful to people. And it's a good article. I mean, I wrote it, right? So it's a good article, but the trouble is that it's not a report of a research study. So there are phases, there's theory being presented, but it's not reporting a research study, and there's no methods section or findings section, as I mentioned previously. So you don't have any findings. You just have basically some principles that came out of this. Now these are useful types of articles. They are very nice. They move the work forward within a specific field, but they are not primary sources. They do not present results of research studies. So it's this type of article with the findings and methods sections that you are wanting to use in your literature review, because what you can do then is report what they found and what methods they followed to find those findings. Hopefully that helps you to be clear. Now let's pretend that we want to cite this article in our literature review. Remember that you must be very careful how you cite articles. Make sure that you do not plagiarize the article. So let's say a discussion here. Let's say I wanted to have a piece of this article that I cite. And I want to say this: students in rural schools were perhaps better positioned to benefit from such approaches than their counterparts in non-rural schools. So I could copy this right out and paste it into my Word document. Let me open up Word here. I could paste it right in the Word document and put the citation there, but if I copy it word for word, then that is plagiarism unless I quote it, unless I put those words in quotes. And so you want to be able to avoid plagiarism by putting direct quotations in quotes. So here we go. Students in rural schools were perhaps better positioned to benefit from such approaches. Let's pretend the article author's name is Smith, and it was written in 2013. So that would be my citation. If I cited it like this, that would be plagiarism. Even though I'm citing it, it's not within quotes, and it's a direct quote. So instead I must make sure that I have quotes around it and use APA formatting for that, rather than the other way I did it. Or I can paraphrase it, right? I can take these words and say, okay, students, so I could say something like, rural school students, or maybe even rural schools benefit or are benefited. And I can go like that, and then if I do that and change up the wording so it's not a direct quote, and also put the citation, then this is not plagiarism either. But you have to be careful, make sure that you don't just copy and paste something in there that's a direct quote without putting those quotations on there. So that's what we have going as far as plagiarism goes, and that's a good reminder to avoid that. So hopefully that gives you some more information on what to do, what kinds of articles you should be reading, and what types you shouldn't be reading. Make sure they are the primary sources. And I think that's everything about this week, so have a good week.